Good afternoon and welcome back to our afternoon session here at TechFest. Before I introduce our next panel, I'd just like to remind you all that you can submit questions. In fact, I'd encourage you to do that. You can do that through our interactive web app. You don't even need to download it. Actually, you can just access it online, and the details of how to do that are behind me. So please do join in. I think the guys are ready for lots of questions today. And with that, I'm going to hand over to broadcaster and comedian Tamandra Harkness, who will be taking us through a very important question this afternoon. Are the robots taking over? Tamandra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Hello, good afternoon. Great to see you here. Before we get on to the really big question, are the robots taking over everything? I wanted to throw out a slightly more specific and nuanced question, because we were having a bit of pre-discussion among the panel about what specifically a robot's going to take over. Apart from completely upstaging events, as they clearly are here, these adorable little creatures. Because there are various different tasks that people are already talking about robots taking over. So I wanted to throw out to you a list of possible things that robots might take over and see which one you'd feel most comfortable perhaps trusting a robot to do now. The list I came up with, and you may like to extrapolate from this later, but was, would you trust a robot to organize your diary for you? Perhaps you already do. To cook your dinner? To cut your hair? And this is a bit of a point for a couple of us on the panel who've recently had human haircuts. To drive your car, or to look after your children. And I think you can vote with your little pads and tell us which you would most trust a robot to do. So if you'd like to do that, and then I will come back and have a look at the results in a few minutes and see what you think. What we're going to do, as you see, we have a panel of 5 people and 2 robots. And we're going to briefly get some of their thoughts through me asking them some focused questions about their area of expertise. And then we'll get a bit of a discussion going on stage. And then we will come out and hopefully get a discussion that includes all of you. Because I know we're tight for time, I'm keen that we cover as much ground as we possibly can. So I want to start off with somebody who already works in the field of applied AI in business. Phil Westcott is the MD of Filament AI. He was at IBM Watson. He was the head of IBM Watson Europe from its launch 4 years ago. So he has a lot of experience in bringing AI into businesses and seeing where it can be applied. And he's now at Filament, which is working directly with companies in using machine learning and AI, including HSBC and Accenture. You made a new friend there, Daniel. So, Phil, I want to start off just saying, what is the technology that is already in use right now, and what kind of applications is it finding?
Sure. So, I mean, our main focus, and certainly in Watson, was on the software side of artificial intelligence. I think it's important to note it's a pretty broad area, artificial intelligence. But if we focus on how businesses are using natural language processing and machine learning right now, it's really in processing huge amounts of data. It's increasing the aperture of data that we can start applying computing power to draw out intelligent insight. So to give you an example, processing a large number of images of wind turbines to spot potential damage and be able to affect preemptive maintenance on a turbine, through to identifying potential littering out of the car window so that the offender can be brought to justice. These are the kind of use cases that can be applied by visual robotics, if you like, by artificial intelligence. So they're very much a practical set of applications ongoing today. On the text analytics, on the text machine learning side, we're seeing companies start to bottle their knowledge that's embedded within the heads of their experts, also in large quantities of text-based knowledge, turning that into something that is accessible to both their in-house teams but also their customers. So here and now, this year and over the next few years, you're going to see more and more AI projects within enterprise and differentiating one company over its competitors by their adoption.
And looking into the near future then, say the next 5 to 10 years, what are the new things that aren't happening yet that you see coming on stream?
I think we're going to see the integration of IoT, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and mixed reality, so virtual reality, augmented reality. At the intercept between those three technology sort of mega trends, we're going to see huge creativity. And most of that creativity is coming out of entrepreneurs and SMEs. And some of it's being addressed by big enterprise. But really, I think you're going to see a lot of partnering between enterprise and entrepreneurs in bringing those ideas to life.
Thank you very much. So we'll come back to you later for your views on other things. Now, our next speaker has already been completely stealing the scene with your creations. Sebastian Conran, one of the world leaders in robotics design, or arguably the world leader in robotics design. And he described his business to me as making technology emotionally engaging. Perhaps I wanted to ask you about enhancing design, but I now feel you really have to start by introducing us to these are presumably your creations that are wandering around trying to make friends with us. So talk us through
There's
these.
Gwen and Fred,
I think Fred might be mine now.
well, there we are. So these are destined to become consumer-facing robots, and they're what we call companion robots, in that they don't physically assist you. I mean, you've got to understand in the robotics world, no one at any price, not Google, not Amazon, has actually designed a robot that could come and pick my glasses off the floor and hand them back to me, let alone make me a cup of tea in my own kitchen. So what we can do, I mean, you know, the human brain, to replicate the human brain, you'd need 1 billion processors. And it would need a computer the size of the QE2. And it would need the sea to cool it. And it would need, you know, going on for $1 billion of electricity a year to run it, you know, with today's technology. So replicating a human being as a robot is some way off, perhaps. But, you know, you could look at, you know, if I designed a humanoid robot, it would be innately disappointing. But, you know, hands up anyone who's got a dog that can obey 10 voice commands. This actually is within reach. So people's expectations of something that is a familiar object that looks vaguely like you know, a dog and a bunny had some fun together, you know, is what we're aiming for. Something that's familiar, emotionally engaging, and where we see their use is that they are designed to help people age and help people look after themselves as they age, because this is going to be a really, really big problem. It will really eclipse Brexit, you know. But the situation is not to try and look after people, but to enable people to look after themselves. So typically how Miro might do that, Miro can see everything, it can hear everything, it can relay information to and forth, it can notice your daily routine, your gait, your facial expression. It can recognize people, and it can also link through to your home hub and other sensors you have in the home. And, you know, the #1 reason why people go into care homes is fear of falling. It's not actually because they've had a fall, but because they're worried about having a fall and nobody coming along to help them. So Miro is just one of a variety of devices which will be able to do this and call for action. And, you know, the person on the other end of the telelink will be able to see what's going on, rewind your life, and also via other technology understand your state of health. But Miro can do other things and remind you and act as a conduit for social media and things like that. You know, I mean, it can link through to the equivalent of Amazon.
Just falling off the stage.
Ouch.
The The cliff sensors aren't
over
working
here.
very well on this.
What have you
I
done?
feel bad.
Daniel?
I could see that was about to happen.
That's all right. No, don't worry. Just push its nose on again.
Keep your head still, Miro. Put your nose back.
If you give it to me, Archie, I'll do it. But anyway, these are what we call beta. They're very much beta. They're for developers to write the software for, because we haven't got all the software written yet. So it's a bit like Steve Jobs when he launched the iPhone. I'll turn him off. When he launched the iPhone 10 years ago, you couldn't go out and buy one because developers were writing all the software. So this is a bit like a brand new laptop that hasn't got Windows. That, I mean, it's got its operating system. It's got a brain-based control system on it. We call it 3BCS, which is the control system. And it's like a newborn baby. It's got a lot to learn. And, when I turn him on... There.
I was going to say, they are distractingly adorable, so perhaps if you could turn them off for now.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, no problem. There we are.
Otherwise, I mean, just to be frank, who's going to sit and look at me talking when there's an adorable rabbit dog with the added jeopardy of it possibly being about to fall off the stage?
They can't play Jeopardy,
Unbeatable combination. Fantastic. Thank you, Sebastian.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to pick up this idea of the kind of the design, the more creative aspect, if you like, of robotics, and move on to Paul Svanitsky, who said he's really interested in what AI means for creativity. He was the director of digital at Universal, which was the biggest group of music companies in the world, and you've now left to forge your own path, haven't you, Paul? So what is the role of digital and creativity and robotics? How does that fit together? Because it's often talked of as the two being polar opposites, that you have robotics here and creativity here. Can they work together, or are they enemies?
No, I definitely think they can work together, and I think there are lots of ways in which that can happen, and part of that is how you define creativity. So I think probably you immediately leap to the idea of AI creating fully finished, sort of perfect pop songs or works of opera or something like that, and maybe that will come at some point. But I think in the middle of that, and certainly before that, there'll be, how do you explore how machine-generated or AI-generated intelligence can maybe help as a jumping off point for further creativity. So can it get, we were just talking about this in the green room, can AI kind of get me to here that will allow me to slingshot to a place that I would never have got to before? I think there's creativity involved in all aspects of entertainment. I think the one probably that I'm touched by every day is how Spotify creates my Discover Weekly playlist every Monday, which is getting better and better and better. And that's actually, I think what's relevant about that is that as someone who's pretty long in the tooth when it comes to the music industry, that's the first time that I've had an appointment to view or an appointment to listen around anything kind of music related. Maybe artists that I love who've had album releases, but now every Monday I look forward to this machine AI generated playlist that I find becomes more and more perfect for my own sort of listening style. So that, I think that is where probably that's almost hidden as well. I'm not quite sure that your average user of a service like that would quite understand just how hard it is to do that. And there's sort of 10 years of that happening really badly. I think where artists can intersect with AI to create new things. I mean, any artist wants to be creative and wants to work with other creative people. So I think if your collaboration might be with a person, or it might be with an incredible AI database. And I'm thinking about things like how do you create great individual experiences for fans? Somebody mentioned augmented reality. So maybe the artist of the probably very near future, the real immersion will be to put on a set of goggles and have someone that's completely bespoke to you and really completely tuned in.
So you'll have your own private virtual festival.
Yeah, well,
or you put your goggles on and they brought the bands that you like.
I think it will. I think that will be the first sort of iteration of that. But I think if you think everything digital is becoming more and more personalised, right? Whether it's the ads that you see online, or the songs that you're served on Spotify, or the books that Amazon suggests that you buy. And I think that that will become more and more hyper-individual. So one of my favourite bands is Queens of the Stone Age. Maybe in the future, my Queens of the Stone Age experience will be completely different from another superfan's experience. So I think there's tons of stuff, the imagination kind of goes all over the place on all that stuff. But I think what is really clear is it's like word one, line one, chapter one of this massive book that will probably take lifetimes to fully explore. So it feels really exciting. And that's also very evident when you look at what the big music companies, the interest that they're taking in it. So Universal, my previous employer, and I'm still very close to, own Abbey Road Studios. And Abbey Road have a music incubation program, music tech incubation program called RED, which I was on the board of. And they've invested in 2 or 3 really interesting AI-driven music-related projects. A business called UberChord, which is about tuition. So imagine that, right? Imagine we could all have the best, most perfect music teacher for us on an app or at the drop of a button. And I think that's really fascinating. And we're also discussing it. If we fast forward 50 years or 60 years, when maybe the robots are doing absolutely everything for us, and we've got unlimited leisure time, maybe that's when we all become super creative. So, people who may not have ever had time or space in their life to think about their own personal creativity might have that and a set of tools that can help them deliver that.
Okay, great. We shall come back to that vision. And next, confusingly, another Paul. There's probably some rule that you have to have 2 Pauls on every panel. Paul Papadimitriou. So slightly different angle on this then. You do horizon scanning for companies about future developments and particularly about how people interact with technology and how that changes, well, the world and society, but the technology itself and even possibly us. Thinking then in terms of the world of work, I mean, you raised this question that perhaps we will have more leisure time, be using it creatively. How do you see technology changing the world of work in the next 10, 20 years maybe?
So let's run with the headline everybody likes to run with these days, robots take over our jobs, right? Is that from the Guardian to the Daily Mail to Telegraph, that's exactly what you read every day. Is that true? I don't know. First of all, before I answer that, there's something that was hinted at by all the preeminent speakers, but when we say robots, it's both the physical form and you used the term earlier on when we met Daniel, the brain, so the software, right? These 2 things sometimes work together, sometimes they don't. And are they taking over our jobs? To answer clearly, yes, they are both. The physical form, non-intelligent ones. I mean, we're on an event by Jaguar on Rover. I mean, if you visit any of the factories of car makers nowadays, I visited recently, for instance, sorry to use a competitor's name, BMW in Munich, and basically there's almost no more humans there. The robots have already taken over these jobs. You have even like now new types of robots that you sit or stand next to, you do the gesture that you're supposed to do in front of the car, the robot learns that gesture and iterates on the gesture, of course makes it faster, but also makes it probably more efficient. So this is something that is already happening. As for the brain part as well, a silly example today, if you have an iPhone, and I know a lot of people have, at least 50% of this room might have an iPhone, and you put a calendar invite in your calendar app in the iPhone, and you put the alert that says time to leave, it will remind you that, like it did this morning for me to come here, that if I want to be on time, and I was born in Switzerland, so I need to be on time, I'm very good with my watches, I would need to leave by transit by 11:30. And if I would not do that, I would be late. And it uses a lot of data, we mentioned data from the TfL, etc., to actually tell me that I should do. This is already some type of very narrow artificial intelligence. And this is where I want to go, because we have the term artificial intelligence or robots are very much loaded. If you think about robots, you'll see Terminator, So Arnie is coming and asking for Sarah Connor, right? And of course it's bad, right? Especially in our kind of Western pop culture type, the robot's always a bad guy. More often than not. Daniel will actually counter me later, and I know that. And on the brain side, the intelligence side, of course, start with HAL. I love pop culture because it represents a lot of what we fear. Pop culture, it's HAL, in 2001. It's also Dave, and I'm not going to open that door anymore, right? And these are already there, as I mentioned, for the iPhone, but these are already there for many other things. The problem is that we always tend to think about it in terms of current jobs versus what will happen, right? Is it still, to take the example of a car factory, do we really want people to still be as factory workers and doing repetitive, painful jobs? Is that what we want for a society? Not really. We can acknowledge that our kids won't do that kind of jobs. We don't want them. It doesn't mean that we don't want to have decent jobs existing in society, but we would like not to have these kind of jobs. So this is where it's already happening. It has happened for thousands of years. Even the invention of the wheel was already an automation. This is going on. And of course, they will replace the jobs. Everything will be replaced. But you know what? I want that to happen. Because for two reasons. First, we have, probably you guys all have, you wake up in the morning and you have 500 emails in your inbox, right? I want to have an AI, whatever you want to call it, intelligent, sentient person in my computer tells me, Paul, these are the 3 emails you should read now, the rest you can discard. This already kind of exists. There are some filters, etc. But I want that because I want to simplify my life and focus on what I'm good at, maybe creativity. And you want these things to happen to you because this is what liberates us as humans. You don't want to be, again, the guy who does, or the woman who does very repetitive jobs. But the positive side is surgery. We want to have better surgeries, more, less invasive, more precise. Well, robots could make that better. A radiologist, my father was a doctor, not a radiologist, but his first cancer was caught by his eye. He saw something. He was like, there's something on this X-ray that I'm not sure. Well, if you have at your disposal all the X-rays in the world and you have a machine that actually learns from that, they can tell you, I want people here in this room to be able to say, oh, this is clearly maybe cancer, we should actually go. And not having, the radiologist will not lose his job or her job. He will be transforming someone that actually makes the human touch possible and say, this is the reading that the computer tells me. Like today, a plane pilot, I'm not saying plane pilots are useless, but a lot of it is actually already automated. Mm-hmm. This is where we're going, honestly. This is where we're going to, the humans going to add over the jobs. So are they going to disappear, the jobs? Yes, the bad jobs will disappear. But I'm actually happy about it. I want the bad jobs to disappear, the ones that we're not meant to do, to have the good jobs. And look, I'll finish with that because I know a long-winded answer, but in the last 10 years, we've had jobs that, as parents, you're like, what the hell is that? YouTube star, or you're like a graphic designer. And we might invent jobs. We will invent jobs because that's what we do as human beings in the next 10, 15, 50 years that will be totally different. That us will be looking at it, this is not a job, but it is. And I think we ought to be positive about that. So yes, they will take over, but it's a good thing.
Okay, well, we've heard a lot of very, very positive notes about how robots are going to enhance our lives, our creativity, our working life. Now, I know Daniel Wilson, after doing a doctorate in robotics at Carnegie Mellon University, so you know what you're talking about, but then you wrote a New York Times best-selling novel called Robopocalypse, mm-hmm. which has dogged you ever since. Most recent novel out recently, by the way, The Clockwork Dynasty. You can buy that now. So did you write the novel because we're heading for a robopocalypse? How do we feel about robots? We've got these adorable rabbit dog things. We have robots possibly taking our jobs. We have invisible AI organizing things around us. But surely the way robotics progresses in society depends a lot on how we feel about them. How do we feel about them?
Well, we're scared of robots. I think that's pretty clear. Excuse me. There's this sort of overwhelming terror that's automatically invoked by new robots. And in fact, the way that I got into writing fiction was I was getting a doctorate in robotics, and I was surrounded by people who were trying to improve the world. I was building intelligent environments, and my friends were building humanoid robots and walkers and space robotics and all these different things. We're all trying to help human beings. And we look at movies and television, and it's always the robot killing people. So I got into this because I wrote a book called How to Survive a Robot Uprising as a joke, to just take it completely seriously. Okay, fine, roboticists will tell you. How do you survive whenever the humanoid is chasing you down? It would have been useful to Sarah Connor, right? And so that book did well, and I got out into the world, and I thought, okay, why are we so afraid of these machines? What is it, And I realized the more I think about it, First of all, I think it's innate. First of all, human beings build tools, right? It's the unique thing about us. If we don't build tools, nature kills us pretty fast, right? So Homo sapiens has been building tools for a couple 100,000 years, and you'd think that having a healthy dose of fear about what you're creating would be a good survival mechanism to keep people around, right? Because we're building more and more powerful tools. I gotta be careful not to move, something's gone wrong.
It's the robots that are trying to attack you through your battery pack.
Yeah,
Try sitting forward
yes,
a bit,
okay.
so you're not leaning on it.
So,
In a really natural, relaxed way.
So yeah, oh, thank you. So, all right, great, I get one of these. So on the most basic general level, I feel like having a healthy fear of the amazing tools that we create is a good thing, and it's probably the reason that we're all here after years and years of doing this. Another thing, though, is you just think about the history. What I love about robotics is that it's transitioned from pop culture to reality. And you look back at least in the West, you look back at the 50s and 60s and all of these movie monsters that we had. There are all these posters of robots carrying off women, you know, and the square-jawed heroes are chasing behind with their ray guns. And who knows what the robots are going to do with women? I don't know. I don't want to know. Actually, I actively don't want to know. And so you've got all this pop culture momentum, right? This is the same era where we had Dracula and the creature from the Black Lagoon and all these creatures. And then at some point, Dracula stays on television, stays in our movies and in our stories, and the robots transition into our lives, right? And they become this real thing. And so we've got this pop culture momentum that is pretty negative. And I think that we're dealing with that transition right now. As consumers, we're requiting all of these stories that we've heard with the reality of what we're getting. And, you know, so I wrote a book called Robopocalypse, which after about like the 7th or 8th syllable of the title, you can kind of figure out what it's about. But my goal with Robopocalypse was to acknowledge this fear that people have and then to subvert it during the story. Unfortunately, most people don't get past the title, and the title has now begun appearing in media where they say, is it the Robopocalypse? Is it? And I just have to call all my roboticist colleagues from when I was in graduate school and just offer them each an apology. You know, I'm so sorry that I've put a name to Voldemort here, and people are calling it this Robopocalypse. So I think that as we interact with real robots, our expectations are going to change, and we're going to start to see the benefits that they have. So far, a lot of this robotics stuff has been behind the scenes, right? So they're in factories, or they're doing stuff behind the scenes on our Facebook feeds and our Twitter feeds, and we don't really notice at all. And also, there's this horrible thing that all of us do. The instant something becomes real, a technology becomes real, it becomes mundane. We don't care anymore. So it can be an amazing thing like speech recognition, where we had, you know, or these little guys performing slams. So they're doing simultaneous localization and mapping, which is an amazing thing 10 years ago, and now no one cares. We just assume that this is part of our lives and it's something that machines can do. So people are very hard to please, I think. And as we put these machines into our lives, I think we're going to start to form relationships with them and maybe come to appreciate them. But we've got to see them in physical incarnations, and we've got to see the usefulness from interacting with them. And I think that slowly our perceptions will change over time.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got lots to work with there. Lots of questions already coming in from you guys. I wondered if before we turn this into a more general conversation in our remaining 10 minutes, I think, is it possible to see the results of that poll at the beginning where I asked what you would trust robots to do? Is that, aha. Here we, oh, look, a lovely bar chart. I do like a nice bar chart.
Good dinner.
Now, Paul, I don't know if you and I should take offence at this, but the cutting your hair, only 1%. We are the people who had a human haircut this week, which I think you'll agree is rather fine human handiwork.
And we're grumbling, well, I was grumbling about mine.
Well, Paul was actually grumbling about his. And in fact, even on the way here, I tweeted and said, what would you trust somebody to do? And somebody answered that the car and the children was fine, but they wouldn't trust a robot to cut their hair.
So
and
having a robot cut your child's hair is clearly out. I don't think that's going to be while driving you to
Your car,
work.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it could drive your car to the hairdresser so the human being can cut your hair. It's quite interesting. Is that because somebody's got sharp scissors near your ears, or is it that we actually like the human interaction with the hairdresser? You clearly don't anymore because you've gone off yours.
Well, I mean, maybe that speaks to the title of the event, and to some degree this panel is around kind of heart and humanity. And I think things like your haircut and the music that you listen to and the films that you watch and things you might consider to be creative is they're all sort of defined by, or undefinable by, your own emotional connection with those. You know, like the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is really only known to the receiver of the haircut, right? And how would you define that? So maybe it is around a mistrust of the emotional aspects of what AI might deliver, because either if it's delivering those things now, they're probably missed or misunderstood. Maybe use that Spotify example to illustrate that, or they just seem so impossible to most people that that'll never happen. That could never happen.
So there's still an opening out there for a trustworthy haircutting.
But also, if I may,
Yeah.
the three that win are basically the most mundane of these, stuff. You have to drive a car on the M25 being stuck all day, or diary. It's not something you look, great, this morning I'm going to organize my diary, right?
Well,
so this is useful.
Things that take up your time.
Exactly.
Right? And I mean, imagine if we could all get for those that drive to work, if it's like a 2-hour commute a day, I could be doing brilliant. I could be playing Subbuteo those 2 hours a day instead of sitting
Sleeping in the car.
I mean, the irony is that, of all those things you put there, the easiest thing for the robot to do is to cut your hair, because it's a repeatable task, and it's much easier to program a robot to do that than to cook your dinner, for instance, or certainly look after your children. But there we are.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Is that maybe there's a mismatch between what robots are able to easily do and what we actually want them to do.
Yeah, and I think our spectrum for what we want them to do is very emotional, and their spectrum is very much mechanical, what they can accomplish. Thinking about as they take over our jobs, as they take over everything we do, you think, what's the last thing that a human being will be able to do that a robot will never be able to do? And I think, we see that represented here. For instance, looking at a haircut, and is it nice? That's what only a human can judge that, you would imagine. Looking after children, that involves love, all these very human aspects. And so you think, what's the last thing a human can do? It's actually experience life as a human. Right? And this is valuable. You think about James Frey's book, A Million Little Things, right? That book was great. It was selling 1 million copies. Oprah loved it. And then they found out that it wasn't a true representation of his actual experience as living as a human being. It was a fabrication. Suddenly, nobody likes the book. The words didn't change. It's the same book. It has no value now. And so you realize, I look at all this social media stuff that we're doing. We're being trained to entertain each other with the minutia of our lives. But it only matters if you really had that wonderful meal and you ate it and experienced it as a human, or if you really gave birth to those children that are obviously adorable, and you're sharing pictures and minutia of your life. And all of that gains its value from the fact that it's an experience that a human being had, and that's the only thing that the robots hopefully can never take away from us.
And I even think that at some point we'll see, I know it's a bit cynical, but we might see, because marketers are very good at this, made by humans label, like we have organic food.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They'll say, this is actually made by humans. It will make us feel, this is actually something that I care for, whether if it's pretty automated, I might not. Actually, some cars makers do that. The last engineer signs, in the engine.
Jaguar, hand stitching the seats. Now we've only got 5 minutes left. I need time to go
Can I just
quickly.
make one point, though? That
Make a brief one, because I want to bring in some questions from the audience.
Right. One thing that robots are very bad at is dealing with intangible issues and making judgments that involve imagination. And that's the one area where humans really have got the high ground.
I'm going to ask you to vote, and because, again, it takes a little time, I'm going to ask you now to vote whether you think we should fear the robots or embrace them, so I can come back to that right at the end. But we have a number of good questions from the audience. We haven't got time to cover all of them. There's one about what happens when robots adopt human morality, which I think is, frankly, a great question, but too big for the remaining 4 minutes of this session. So I'd like to encourage you all to go out and argue about that over coffee, including the panelists. And also somebody asking, perhaps quite nervously, could robots replace journalists? Well,
They already
to some
do.
extent they already are, yes.
They are,
Could robots create music with emotion, and would we want them to? And another very good question, robots may help us fortunate first worlders, but what about those in developing nations that have people that need those unenviable jobs to survive? And a third very good question, actually, is it a case of AI being like fire, an excellent servant but a terrible master? How did the panel feel about the recently reported private coded conversation between two Facebook chatbots, the thing where the chatbots developed their own shorthand and code, which wasn't in the human language they'd been taught. And some people felt rather nervous that they're now talking between themselves and we don't understand it. So because we do really only have about 4 minutes left, panel, maybe you'd like to come back on anything, either for other people's points or any of those excellent questions from the audience. So Phil, I haven't heard from you for ages, so let's get your thoughts.
Yeah, I was sort of biting my tongue on the jobs and replacement there. I think there's a natural bias. The survey was thinking of robots, of AI, as a one-for-one replacement of a human task. Whereas the reality over the next 5 years, it's going to be augmentation of the way we do things, whether it's writing music, or building a car factory. It's augmentation of our lives. And if you think, if on the list was, would you send a robot to a conference like this? No, you want to be here. You want to learn for yourself. But would you want a robot assistant in your ear, augmenting the experience, telling you where you'd seen Phil before a few weeks ago, telling you where maybe you can learn more about Sebastian's very cute bunnies? This extra context, think of it like a buddy in your ear. And it literally could be an earpiece or a head-up display in your contact lenses, giving you an enriched experience of reality. That is the way AI is going to unfold in the next few years, not just like a one-for-one replacing humans.
How long is a few?
Some of this stuff in the next 5 years. I mean, there's already earpieces for people when they're working in construction, giving feedback to the foreman on their state of health and giving the individual instructions and safety warnings.
Creativity, music, emotion.
It's not for the AI to decide whether it's emotional or not. I'll decide whether that track or movie or book is emotional. To use your Daniel Frey point, your James Frey point, that book was highly emotional, then suddenly not emotional at all. So it was in the eye of the beholder, not the creator, I think.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, we'll always need humans to curate.
Well, I think humans apply the emotional level to your point about, imagination.
An intangible.
Yeah, it's an intangible thing. I think it's that will come from humans to decide whether something is emotional or.
What's quite interesting is actually, I agree with you completely, but the interactions that we're having with our technology, it is up to the technologists to decide how those machines are going to try to interact with us. And it's up to them to actually demand to be treated in a moral way. So for instance, I have an Alexa, an Amazon Echo that I talk to. I tell her what to do constantly. She speaks to me as she sounds like a woman, and so some part of your brain feels like I'm talking to a human being here. I say please and thank you to my Alexa because I don't want to turn into a horrible person. Now my children have gotten to the point where they can say Alexa instead of Awexa, and so she listens to them, and I realize there's a human-like interaction that's happening here, and it is really up to the technologists to make sure that those interactions are moral. And that means that the machines are going to have to say, excuse me, what's the magic word, right? Before they will do what we say. Not because we care about Alexa. We don't. She's just bits and bytes. But we care about ourselves, and we want to be in a situation where the interactions we have with our technology are making us better people, or at least not turning us into monsters.
I think morals and ethics is another separate 5-hour discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe next year's TechFest. So on that note, let's see the results of your final vote. Are we embracing or fearing the robots? Look at that embrace, and I think your two cute little fellas probably swung that vote a
Literally,
great deal.
let's embrace them, yeah.
Yes, let's embrace them. So please thank our fantastic panel, who crammed a lot into a very short session. Thank you all for your questions and contributions.